We have been working with adults with disabilities for 50 years. And in those 50 years, it has always been, in one way or the other, working with wood products. We began just making pallets, stair steps for trailers and stakes and that sort of thing. And in the last 10 years, it's morphed into making a lot more. So let's see if I can get that screen sharing going. Okay, regarding wood drying, what I was asked to talk about tonight was wood drying, specifically as I understand it, and it's going to be kiln drying. In this case, it happens to be a dehumidifier kiln, air drying, and vacuum kiln drying. So we're going to touch on who we are, the advantages of drying wood using each of those areas: air drying, dehumidifier kiln, vacuum kiln, blocks, stickers, and prepping wood for drying. As I was saying earlier, we were founded in 1971. That's a picture there of the original building. It was an old garage just up the street. And it's kind of grown since then. We began as a sheltered workshop, and we do pay them minimum wage and train a lot of people. What's not covered in there is that, by example, over the last 5 years, we've put nearly 400 people to work in the community. Most of them, 55% or so, have stayed on at the jobs that they're at. And we do things such as helping them learn skills, find work in the community, continue to help them with their employment, supporting it, vocational rehabilitation, and industrial and finished product skills training. And we support all of that with the work that we do. We get about 5% in donations, and the rest of it's from earnings from services or products. A third of the property we have is dedicated to furniture building and finished goods, with a full complement of industrial woodworking equipment, and that's growing. And that enables us to produce a variety of products. I'll show you a few of them here in a few moments. A third of the property is dedicated to industrial woodworking, making pallets, crates, stakes, and other industrial wood items. And this area is where we have the small sawmill and the dehumidifier kiln. And about a third of the property is dedicated to future expansion, which will be an educational center that will enable us to provide basic training, the skills needed to work with wood or hold an industrial job of some sort. What we have found over the years is there is a growing number of people that truly do not know how to read a tape measure or use basic tools or understand certain basic work safety. And those are some of the things that we help train individuals in. This picture here shows just a few of the items that we make or have made. Everything from dressers, cedar chests. There's a sign there on the Columbia River that we, for one of the trailheads. Also make small kitchen utensils and frames and just a variety of things. And with that, we've had to find ways to get wood that would be usable, and it would be out of a variety of wood that was cost efficient to us. So we have about 21 species of wood, and we make furniture or industrial parts from all of it, from ash to any other type of wood that you can imagine. And we also just finished, by example, using cottonwood, which we dried for some time, and made a large dining table out of. Came out rather nicely. This is a picture of our property. On the right-hand side here And the front corner is where I'm sitting. And we have in here woodworking, finishing equipment. And this is future cover for storing wood. We store wood all along the back. Here we have a kiln. This is a space that's 12 by 14 foot tall, 12 foot wide, 32 foot deep. Have a wood miser sawmill here. Lots of logs and such in the yard. And we're going to be building these two sites here for future expansion and training. When I talked to Jerry and Bill the other night, we were talking about the various things we did. So I put together a chart here of advantages and disadvantages from our perspective of working with each of these. With air drying, we have a lot of low upfront costs. It's just basically blocking stickers, cover on a tarp, and or some sort of roof over it. Could be a piece of plywood or a piece of metal, whatever. But usually you can do that for well under $100. The dehumidifier kiln, you actually have to build a structure for that, get the electricity, the permits, the equipment, all of the controllers, insulation, etc. And on average, it runs about $12,000 to $15,000. I've seen them for built for as little as $3,000, and I've seen several that spend way more than $20,000. The vacuum kiln has intrigued me because it was low, moderate upfront cost. You have the equipment and the electricity, the controllers, etc., but the cost for it is, so far as I can see, under $2,000, and we're building one ourselves. I'll show you a picture of where we're at with it here a little bit further on. The air drying is simple, can be done almost anywhere. The dehumidifier kiln, again, you've got to create the building, insulate the structure, and install the components. And the vacuum kiln, well, you just need to build the equipment. It's not that difficult, but it does require some technical proficiency. Air drying time, well, it does take a while. And when we first started, we were told to expect to take about a half an inch per year in calculating our drying times. We were basing that off of walnut that we had gotten in, black and English walnut that we were cutting down to 3-inch thick planks. And so we decided to use that time frame for everything else. And we have a variety out there of thicknesses, everything from as little as half an inch up to 3 or 4 inches. And in some cases, cants of various logs that are 12 to 18 inches across. Dehumidifier kilns, they tell you that you can dry ash, for instance, that's 4/4 in about 35 to 45 days. We have found that it will take usually up to around 60 days to do it. And if you want to have it dry properly, you've got to be very careful how it's stacked and put in there. And we'll get into more of that in a moment. Vacuum kiln, again, I'm truly intrigued with this. Depending on the thickness, on the wood type and how it's stacked, etc., you can dry wood for a project, let's say a set of chairs or a dining table, chest of drawers, in as little as 3 to 5 days, and it'll be uniform humidity, say 5 to 8% or less if you want. And it will be dry through and through. You don't necessarily have that with air drying and dehumidifier kiln. The volume that can be dried, well, air drying, you have an unlimited amount, just as long as you have the space for it. For our kiln, we have about 4,000 board feet that we can do, and the capacity is based on the size of the dehumidifier kiln that you buy. And which, incidentally, outside of a solar kiln, is possibly the cheapest kiln an individual can buy as compared to microwave or gas-fired or electric-fired kiln. The volume on the vacuum kiln is rather small, 100 board feet or so at the most. And it's made up for in the fact that you can quickly turn jobs around. So you're using wood that has been freshly dried to the point that you want. And theoretically, I haven't been able to prove this yet, I can mix woods, let's say a maple and walnut, and be able to have them both the same relative humidity or moisture content. So they should work together well when I'm assembling jobs. The drying level on air drying we have found typically is around 12%. And that will vary based on whether it's summer or winter, whether it's raining or dry. The drying level for a dehumidifier kiln, we comfortably get down to 6 to 8%, sometimes less. But that seems to be a good set point, 6 to 8%. However, again, as I've noted in here, for both that and air drying, it may not be uniform. We've taken wood that we've air dried for 4 or 5 years and cut it open and found the middle to be different than what the outside is. And this is on 8-quarter wood, say maple or white oak, etc. And we found the same thing with maple and white oak and other woods that we've tried that are hardwoods. Douglas fir is a softwood, cedar, Douglas fir, redwood. Those tend to dry uniformly inside and out, but the hardwoods tend to hold on to moisture more. The drying level for vacuum kilns appears to be you're able to get down to 5% or even less, and it's uniform throughout. My observations are that the various species of woods dry best when air dried first, which enables the wood to stabilize. And once they're air dried for a period of time, they can be successfully finished in the kiln. Any wood can be dried in a kiln. However, drying wood in the kiln can be hard on wood. Even a dehumidifier kiln, though more gentle than some of the other kilns, it can lead to case-hardened wood or other difficulties if you're not careful. Wood is a living, breathing organism. It breathes and absorbs and expels moisture until the day it no longer exists. When you are drying wood, the water that's trapped inside has to travel out through various routes, pathways. And if you dry the outside too quickly without allowing it to heat up on the inside and the vapors from the process of drying escape out, the outside hardens, it constricts, and so it doesn't allow that moisture on the inside to escape out like it should. So you have to dry it gently so that the moisture on the inside can continue to escape until it's even with the outside. By case hardened, I mean we dried it too quickly and the outside literally becomes impenetrable to the moisture that's trying to escape from the inside.
Greg, just a question on that very point. Recently, I've tried drying some small pieces of wood in my kitchen oven, which I had read about. And based on your comments about case hardening, I'm guessing that drying wood in a kitchen oven probably is not likely to be a successful approach, since, you know, in my recent experience, I tried drying it at 170 degrees for maybe 45 minutes or so. What's your thought about that?
Depending on the size of the wood or the thickness, I think you could have some success with it. If I were drying something that were 8/4 in there and I put it into a 170-degree oven, I would run the risk, in my mind, of hardening the outside. So when I opened it up, you'd have the inside would still be moist. And then when you do open it up, that inside is going to react differently because it is moist than the outside will, which will cause all sorts of interesting things for the visual appeal of somebody who wants to watch wood change. It'll cup, it'll bow, twist. It it gets fascinating. It's amazing to me how alive wood can be. And hidden stresses. The other thing is that when you don't dry it evenly, there are stressors in the wood because of how it's grown, that if they're not locked in place because they're dried properly, and you still can't lock everything in place, but if it's uniformly dry, then it seems to hold that shape that you dried it to. But if it's still moist inside and you open it up, those stressors are released, and that also affects what happens to the wood. You know, I've never been asked that. I don't know the answer to it. I'm going to have to research that. Thank you.
Fair enough.
So my personal observations that I had put down here is that wood is a living, breathing organism that will continue to move as it reacts to the moisture and temperature of the environment it is in long after it's been converted into a simple board or a fine piece of furniture. Early on, before I had learned some things, we built a table, a dining room table out of some hardwoods with a breadboard on the end. Everything was nice and dry. We had gotten it all down to 8%. We were mixing a couple of different kinds of wood, but they were similar densities. And so the piece that went along the end, we, instead of putting it in so it could expand and contract, we glued it. Well, one night, the happy couple that had bought it and were pleased with it woke up to the sound of what they thought was a gunshot. And the middle of the table had literally split right down the middle. And they had nowhere to do its expansion or contraction because they had been locked in with a cross grain we had put on both ends of the table. Taught me a valuable lesson about how wood works. So they salvaged it, put a piece of glass over the top, and still use it to this day. But wood is a living thing. And when drying wood, we have found that however we decide to dry it, care needs to be taken, carefully planned how the wood is dried to help ensure the best final product. About a year ago, we were making a bunch of large fence boards for a large trail section down along the Columbia River. And so we cut down these Douglas fir logs into planks and beams, and they were rushed down to the Portland area and put through a industrial kiln. When we brought them back, they were dry, ostensibly dry, but when we had to cut into some of them because they were not thoroughly dry, but had just been dried in the outside, much like you get when you buy a 2x4 at a local hardware store, we would find that the planks and the beams would move on us, and we had to redo a number of them. The drying process, again, I guess it depends on what you want, and you have to be careful how you plan so you get the best product. Kiln drying works really well when the process is deliberate. And by deliberate, I mean careful attention is paid to how the wood is stacked, the airflow, close monitoring of the temperature and relative humidity, and proceeding slowly rather than pushing the drying process. And as we mentioned earlier, if you dry too fast, accelerating the temperature before the relative moisture has lowered, it can cause case hardening and other damage to the wood. And this will result in moisture being trapped inside when the boards are cut or planed. The wetter wood on the inside will react and can lead to bowing, cupping, twists, and all sorts of other delightful artistic work. This is an illustration I took from the wood web about stickering wood. And when we are stickering, we first started getting wood and air drying, that we weren't careful about how we stickered wood. So we would randomly put stickers between the levels. Because the pressure wasn't even going up and down, the wood would bow in certain areas, it would, or cup or bend, and it would follow the stickers. And so if the sticker was moved over 6 inches, I might have a dip in the wood where the sticker wasn't, because there's pressure above it, but not pressure to hold it up. So we found that we use stickers that are the same thickness, and it works best when they're the same width and depth. For our purposes, we've also gone to using 3/4 by 1 inch thick stickers. And they are working better for us than those which are larger in size. I have come to believe that the reason for this is because it forces the air to flow through there faster when we are running it through the kiln. The kiln has a baffle on top that comes down to the top of the stack, and then the fan blows air through. And with the smaller, even spaces, the air goes through more quickly than it does through larger spaces and draws off the moisture more evenly. And we've also found that we do well placing them at 12 inches approximately apart. The illustration there is showing 18 to 24 inches, and that certainly works well, but for our purposes, we've gone to doing it at 12 to 18 inches maximum. This is how some of our lumber looked when we first did it, but we did not do a good job. And we didn't learn how to properly set the blocks. We didn't put the blocks at even heights. That was really important. So now we use pallets or 4x4s or metal racks, the spacing running from 12 to 24 inches. And we've learned to be very careful about stacking, so all the sizes are the same on each level, as in thickness. And if we need to leave a gap in the middle, we do that. So we may have an area there where you can put another board in there, but there's no point in it because it's not the same thickness as the other boards. Our kiln is made by Nile. They're, I believe, out of Maine. And they make the dehumidifier kilns for Wood-Mizer. This is this information directly off of their site. and ours will do up to 4,000 board feet. They say that you can go between 70 and 120 degrees. We've taken it up to 140 plus. We've actually taken it up to over 155 degrees. And the drying time they give you for 4x4 green pine as an industry standard is 80 to 8% in 12 days. And that's pretty accurate. 12 to 15 days is pretty good for that, for the soft woods, be it Douglas fir, pine, cedar, or redwood. But again, we're taking a lot longer in each stage. And how they have this set up in the kiln, and it's not just our kiln, but other kilns that I've seen, is they go through a series of stages. In our particular case, we'll start out at 80 degrees and 90% humidity. I'm sorry, 90 degrees and 80% humidity. Then we'll go to 60% humidity and 100 degrees. And then we'll go to 30% relative humidity and 120 degrees. And each one of those areas take a week to 2 weeks or longer. Then at the end of that time period, we have a cooling off period, which is incredibly important. If we do it properly, we'll turn the heat off and just let the air circulate. And in about a week's time, it'll drop to an ambient temperature. If we take the wood out before it has dropped all the way down to the ambient temperature, when it hits the temperature outside, whether it be greater or less, and whether the moisture is greater or less than what's in the kiln, where it is at whatever temperature and moisture level, it will warp. It doesn't matter to me if it is 3/4, 4/4, 6, 8, 12/4. Every bit of it we've had troubles with if we take it out too quickly. It has to have time to settle so it becomes equivalent to whatever the ambient temperature is at the time in the outside around it. If I would open the doors of the kiln at that point, at the end of that week, it'll be the same temperature and moisture inside as it is outside. There's a book on vacuum kilns by Joshua Saleston, I believe he pronounces it, and he talks about that. That's the name of the book, Vacuum Kiln Drying for Woodworkers. I believe it's currently $27. It's a pretty good book. And he is able to demonstrate in there how you can turn things around much more quickly than you can using traditional drying methods. But I'll leave that for you gentlemen and ladies to take and read on your own time. These are pictures. On the left here is a picture of a kiln that's been completed. On the right is the one that we're building. It's 9 foot long, roughly 24 inches across, and has a rolling rack on the inside. And we wound up sourcing all the other things, the gauges, the vacuum pump, etc. for that. Here is a video by a gentleman that Jeff Hankson. He's out of Canada, and it walks you through building one of the vacuum kilns, specifically the one in the book mentioned just a moment ago. And he takes a good half hour and he goes through each step of it, and I found it to be quite enjoyable. But then again, I like that sort of thing. And here are, I believe, 4 pages of reference material that I use. I could have put more on there, but I thought I'd stop at 4 pages. And so the first page here is about air drying wood. Second one is kiln drying wood. next vacuum drying, and the last is the block stickers and sealing and drying times. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty much it, except for, of course, your question. On the picture you see on the screen there,
Yes.
on the left-hand side, this petcock is how the water is drained out. So on this one here, you see on the right side, I have doors on either end that will be sealing it. And I'm using your urethane gasket. And the top there is where the gauges and probes go in. And there are entrances like this on the base of this that we're able to drain the water out of.
Doesn't that break the vacuum when you try to drain it out, though?
It goes into a holding tank.
Ah.
And it goes through a pipe that has a bunch of straws in it to increase the surface area.
Okay. Cool.
And then we have another question from John Hudson. In a vacuum kiln, the water is probably boiled out and pumped out as water vapor. I guess that's not a question, but.
That's an excellent observation, yes. And that's one of the things that fascinated me about it. In Denver, if you go to boil water, you have to use a higher temperature than you do, say, down in Chehalis, or certainly even lower temperature if I'm down below sea level, like at the Dead Sea or something of that nature. So the higher the vacuum, the greater the atmospheric pressure, the lower the temperature needed to boil the water. In the video that I have suggested for you there, he puts a camera lens on a cable inside, and they get it at the temperature, and you can see the water, the steam coming out of the wood, I believe at 120 degrees. And it just literally brings all the water out from the inside because the vacuum is lowering the temperature enough, increasing the atmospheric pressure enough that the water is boiling at a low temperature or vaporizing and escaping from the wood. In the sense that, from my experience, we have noted here that if you use a board that has been set aside for a couple of years, we have a number of those, if it's been properly kiln dried, the wood will most likely be at the equivalent moisture level of the air surrounding it. So it might get up to 12%, but doesn't tend to go higher than that. I've heard the same thing. And I don't know about Madrona. We did dry a piece for a gentleman, a small amount, and it appeared to dry well. We have dried yew wood, which I understand is much the same in its characteristics, and it's dried quite well with minimal splitting and is dry through and through. The gauge goes up to 30, and we will take the vacuum nearly to 30 on that. So we're going to maximum vacuum.
So, we're at sea level, and I guess I don't know what the PSI. I'm not a scuba diver, so I don't really understand, what the PSI levels are. But I know that 33 feet is like an additional atmosphere if you go underwater. But how much? I mean, how much are you? In pounds per square inch? Is that the measurement you're referring to?
Yes and no. When I asked the question, and as I've researched this, the best answer I got back was yes. So take it up to the gauge where we tell you to take it to, and you will have your answer. So that's a non-answer, but we bought the gauges to go and measure 30, I believe it's MF, and so that's where we'll be taking the vacuum kiln to, getting the maximum amount of vacuum in it, which I understand is we can't get much more than that. Can you see the screen there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so I said MF, it's actually an M bar.
Ah, it's
Millibar, like
millibars.
a barometer.
Yes.
Oh,
And here is where we're taking it to.
totally.
Oh, Tor.
Okay.
And we're going to be taking it to 30. And that's where we were told was going to be about the maximum we would get with the vacuum pumps that we have available for us. And that would create a near zero vacuum. I'm sure zero is not the right term, but an excellent vacuum for evacuating the water out of the wood. And so this is a picture, I believe, of the brand of meter that we're putting on there, or gauge.
So a TORR is 1 millimeter of mercury. I've just looked it up. That's the black scale on the gauge.
Here.
Okay. So you're going to about 30.
Yes, we are. And they said
Okay,
we're
so
gonna
Dan,
be-
you nailed it.
28 and 30 is about where it's going to fall when it's actually operating.
One bar is roughly atmospheric pressure. So that's 1.04 or 1/25 of atmospheric pressure.
Okay.
And I found a chart which will show that the boiling point of water at that is probably around 40 degrees C, give or take. The curve gets pretty steep at that point. So I don't know if you have to heat it when it's in the vacuum.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
In fact, I went out because of the size of the chamber. I was trying to figure out how to properly, uniformly heat it. And what I stumbled upon was an animal heating blanket or heating pad, specifically for pigs or cows, but for the baby animals. And it's 6 foot long. It's and 18 inches wide, and it can be slid in there and will provide uniform heat that will respond to a rheostat. So we can actually set a particular temperature on it by how we set the rheostat. And I'm hoping that it's as durable as they say it is. I figure since full grown and baby animals are climbing over it all day long, it ought to survive inside the kiln with some wood laying on it.
Okay, so your water should be boiling at about 80 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally.
Nice one. That's good.
Well said.
So another question here, and I think maybe on the mind of a few people, is that Greg, your kiln is for hire, and you offered
About 45 days.
And you're pretty much continuously running your kiln, or do you have some down months, for example?
No, I wish I did, but no, I don't. We make a portable garden for a company out of Seattle that sells them to retirement homes around the United States. And we make that out of Douglas fir. So we are constantly running Douglas fir in there so that we can build more of these for them.
Hmm.
So what I try to do is get a 3,000 or 4,000 feet of Douglas fir dry. And then when that's dry, I open it up to whoever wants to use it. And then as soon as it opens up again, if there's nobody there, I stick more Douglas fir in. I have been warned about not doing that. What we have found is that it is best, I suppose, to only put maple in, by example. However, we have found that if we put both soft and hardwoods in there together, or different species of hardwoods, as long as we are gentle in what we're doing,
Yeah.
i.e. not trying to push it to a particular time schedule, but
Yeah.
letting the wood talk to us and tell us when it's ready,
Yeah.
we don't tend to have a problem. And the advantage of putting green softwoods in with a hardwood is it releases moisture as it's drying from the softwoods, which acts as a steam bath for the hardwoods to help keep the case soft and pliant to allow the moisture on the inside then to escape, like we were talking about earlier.
Thank you.
Certainly, and incidentally, that brings out something else. There are a number of kilns that will actually mist their wood on a regular basis to help promote the internal drying of the wood. I believe Cascade does that in one of the portions of theirs. It doesn't seem to matter.
Okay. Just question of how quickly it could boil out through the center of the wood to the outside.
Precisely. That's what was so fascinating to me. In the number of years that we've done this, I never saw another case, even with a microwave kiln. There's a number of videos for Canadian woodworkers that bought a large microwave kiln. And I've looked at those and other sites, and it heats it up on the inside, and you can see all the thermal imaging that's going on, but I never see the water escaping like I do in the videos of people showing what happens when you apply a vacuum to it. And you literally can sit there and watch the water begin to boil and come out in steam from the wood. And the other, it's by guess and by golly.
Okay.
I have a comment. I was down at a hardwood place down in Portland, Gobi Hardwoods, and they have a really big vacuum kiln there. It looks like the back of a semi. And I talked to them about it, and they says the one drawback they have is that occasionally they get really wet wood in there that will actually explode on them. The lady says it makes a hell of a noise.
Well, if you pump the pressure down, the water will boil quickly.
Yeah.
And it'll want to expand faster than they can get out of the wood.
Interesting.
I've heard of that happening. I'm hoping I never experience it. Yes. Yes and no. We do not sell lumber that can be used legally to build a house.
Okay.
We do sell lumber though, and we do sell various woods.
So are we able to come down, and do you have a stock that we can, as hobbyist woodworkers, we can look at? And
sure. I believe when Dick was down here, I showed him stacks and stacks and more stacks of wood. And it's a matter of finding what you want or saying, I think there's a piece back in the corner there, under the other piece in the corner, and can you get that one out? And then we get a forklift over and we pull stuff out. They say yes, no, maybe it's the other stack, and we move forward.
Greg, thank you. It's really quite interesting. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'll give you the virtual applause.
Yeah,
Thank you all who made it here tonight. I apologize again for the delays and problems, but there's always going to be some of those things that happen, I'm afraid. But
Well,
thanks
thank you for your kindness and listening to me. And I hope it was beneficial for each and every one of you.